Good morning and welcome to Sunday School at Second Baptist. I'm glad you could be with me this morning. We're continuing to go through Isaiah, and the title of our lesson this week is God Acts. And I think a lot of what we've been studying through Isaiah is showing us, or reminding us of the character of God. You know, if we're not careful, we sometimes try to make it so that God is just like us, or He's our buddy. And I think it's good for us to go through this and see the character of God and how awesome He really is, and how He is so much bigger and more powerful and more everything than we are, so that we do remember that we can serve Him and obey Him and love Him and adore Him and honor Him because of who He is. And so it's good for us to study these things and to be reminded. So I want to cover a few chapters in sort of summary to get started that we're not going to actually focus on, but I hate to skip chapters, and so that's what I'm doing. This section then sort of covers the chapters of chapter 42 through 48. And this is a time where it's being foretold that the Babylon captivity would happen for Judah, and then after that the remnant would be able to return again to the Promised Land and to Jerusalem. And so, you know, throughout this section, there's also some references again to the coming Messiah, though it's not as explicit as it will be later on in the book. But right through this section, there's a couple of things that refer to Jesus and talk about that. But mostly what it's talking about is the coming exile and then redemption back from the Babylonians. And, you know, we had talked about previously that Assyria kind of fades away and the Babylonians become the strong power. And as it has happened, the Babylonians have already taken Israel, the nation of Israel, into exile. And, you know, there was Israel and there was Judah. The kingdom was divided. And so now during this time, it's foretelling that Judah is going to be taken into exile, but a remnant will be able to come back from that. And one of the things that I wanted to mention before we go into the focus verses is a section in chapter 42, right at the beginning of the chapter, where it says, "Behold my servant." I'm reading from verse 1. I'm just going to read down for about 4 verses. "Behold my servant whom I uphold, my chosen one, in whom my soul delights. I have put my spirit upon him. He will bring forth justice to the nations. He will not cry out or raise his voice, nor make his voice heard in the street. A bruised reed he will not break, and a dimly burning wick he will not extinguish. He will faithfully bring forth justice. He will not be disheartened or crushed until he has established justice in the earth, and the coastlands will wait expectantly for his law." And this section of Scripture is quoted very nearly exactly like that over in Matthew. In Matthew chapter 12 and verses 17 to 21. I won't read it over again, but you can see it there, Matthew 12, 17 to 21, where the writer of the book of Matthew says, it's talking about things that Jesus had said, and then right after that, it says this was to fulfill what was spoken through Isaiah the prophet, and then it refers to these verses. And so basically he's attributing these verses to Jesus, because Jesus did not respond to the Pharisees, in the way you might imagine. He just withdrew from them, and put off the ultimate time when he would be crucified. And so, anyway, it's interesting all through the Gospels how many times it refers back to Isaiah and to other of the prophets as well in regard to Jesus. But this was one section of verse where it refers back to Jesus. And then as we go forward, one of these sections of 42 leading up to chapter 46, which is going to be our focus. But if you read through this chapter, it has repetition, and it talks about the downfall of the people and how they're going to be taken away, and the graven images and things like that, and I'll refer back to that in a moment. But then when it gets over to one particular section, it talks about specifically that Cyrus, the Persian king, will be one to be involved in bringing the people out of their captivity and being able to restore the remnant. And so, sometimes, like we talked about before, it can be very specific as they foretell the things that are to come. And in that case, it is very specific, and it mentions other, nations and things like that. It's good to read through that, though, with the perspective of knowing that this is the time then that they are being told, hey, you're going into captivity. And, it's back to the title of the lesson, God acts. It's reached a point with the people of Judah that God has decided they are going into captivity, and they will be taken to Babylon. And the decision has been made. And over again, it refers to the idol worship. This was an abomination to God. It was something that he hated, and he finally had it. And these were the consequences now that they were suffering, but still he loved them. It's like a child. If you have a very, very disobedient child and they've done horrible things, you don't stop loving them, but you may have to allow them to suffer the consequences of their choices in hopes that they'll learn a lesson. And I think that's the same way that God is dealing with his chosen people at this time. So our focus then is going to be on chapter 46. And right at the beginning of it, these verses are not printed in the book, but the first two verses talk about how these two gods of the Babylonians have, which the people of Judah had, brought in. These were two of the many gods from surrounding nations that they had brought in, and were worshiping these gods. It talks about those gods are bowed down and fallen over, and the things, it says, the things that you carry are burdensome, a load for the weary beast. They stooped over, they have bowed down together, they could not rescue the burden, but have themselves gone into captivity. So basically, when the Israelites were to be taken into captivity, they probably packed up their gods and took those with them, because they still weren't ready and willing maybe to lay those things aside and understand that they needed to serve God and He alone. And so I thought it was interesting that he said, even your gods have been taken captive, speaking in the future tense. And so in verse 3 is where we start, and I'm going to read verses 3 and 4. Now I'm on chapter 46 in case I jumped around. So 3 and 4, listen to me, O house of Jacob, and all the remnant of the house of Israel, you who have been born by me from birth, and have been carried from the womb, even to your old age I will be the same, and even to your graying years I will bear you. I have done it, and I will carry you, and I will bear you, and I will deliver you. I think this is very interesting because in this instance God says house of Jacob, and that's not a phrase that has been being used. It's been there's been a distinction made between house of Israel and house of Judah, but now he's changed it and he has said house of Jacob. He does refer to the remnant of the house of Israel, but I think it's foretelling that when they got taken away into captivity, they began to realize that, hey, we're one people. We're not Israel and Judah, really. We're one. We're the God's chosen people. And I think they were reminded of that as they were in captivity. And it's also a reminder to us that the character of God, where it says, even into your graying years I will bear you. God cares for us. He cares for us all of our lives. And He is watching over us day by day. He sees the things that we do. And He cares about our day. And I think it's something for us to remember and be reminded of, that God is... that is a part of His character, is the way that He cares for us, just like He cared for the nation of Israel. As a contrast to that, an idol that you might worship does not care for you. You care for it, right? You build it, you fashion it, you make it, and then you worship it, and it doesn't do anything for you. It is a burden in the way that you have to carry it around, and it's a reference to the way that they would make an idol and have a celebration and carry that through the streets, for people to see. And that even happens in our day now with idols, but also we have to be very careful that that even among people who would call themselves Christians in some countries, they have made idols of certain of the saints or Mary or whatever, and they would parade these through the streets, and that happens, even now. And in this part of it, it is important for us to remember that idols don't do anything for us. We do for them. Let's read verses 5, 6, and 7. To whom would you liken me and make me equal and compare me? This is God speaking. That we would be alike. Those who lavish gold from the purse and weigh silver on the scale, hire a goldsmith and he makes it into a god. They bow down, indeed they worship it. They lift it up on the shoulder and carry it. They set it in its place and it stands there. It does not move from its place. Though one may cry to it, it cannot answer. It cannot deliver him from his distress. And this is just, a better description of the nature of an idol. It's powerless. It has no feeling, and people, yet they cry out to it, or may, pour all of their emotion toward that idol. It's not there to help them. And there's an even better description in Isaiah 44, going back a couple of chapters, verses 9 to 20. I think that that's a part that you would want to go back and read, because it talks about the more details of how a man takes and he may make an idol out of gold or whatever. And then it says, it describes a man who, I guess he can't afford a golden idol, and so he takes a piece of wood and he carves an idol for himself. And then he with part of the wood, he burns fire. He makes a fire and he cooks his dinner. And with the other part of that same wood, he bows down and worships this idol that he's made. And I thought it was just an interesting description of an idol, and how, this man, you just kind of get this vision of the man there, with his idol. And then he's made the rest of that piece of wood into firewood, and he's cooking his dinner over it, And really, I guess the ridiculousness of falling down and worshiping something like that. And, I say all of that, and we can look at that and say that it is ridiculous. But at the same time, do we worship some of the things that we have made? And sometimes it might not be a thing you have made, but you might have made the money. You might have worked and gotten the money to purchase that thing. And it's very easy to make an idol out of our things that we have, and to begin to worship those things and put them ahead of even a relationship that you might have. It is something for all of us to be careful about when we think of it. Okay, let's move on. And again, we're looking at God's character and how much He really does not like us worshiping any other thing but Him. And, that is, I guess, one of the 10 Commandments. The first one, thou shalt have no other gods before me. It's important to God, and He reminds them and us over and over and over again. This is His character. Now let's look at verses 8 and 9. Remember this and be assured. Recall it to mind, you transgressors. Remember the former things long past. For I am God, and there is no other. I am God, and there is no one like me. I'm going on to verse 10. Declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times things which have not been done, saying, my purpose will be established, and I will accomplish all my good pleasure. So in this section, God is reminding again of His character, that from the beginning, when He created the earth, He has had a plan in action, and He is working that plan out. And that they had been told from the beginning of future things, and even some which have not yet happened, but they've been told. And He's saying, don't forget who I am and how I told things in the past that happened. And now I'm telling you this, and it's going to happen. And so, He's just reminding them of His character and how they need to pay attention. And as it goes on from there, let's see. Let's read remember this verse that I just read where it says declaring the end from the beginning. That's a thing that God does, and I'll tell you why in a minute. Okay, reading in verse 11, 12, and 13 now. I'm going to finish the chapter. Calling a bird of prey from the east, the man of my purpose from a far country. Truly I have spoken, truly I will bring it to pass. I have planned it, surely I will do it. Listen to me, you stubborn-minded, who are far from righteousness. I bring near my righteousness, it is not far off, and my salvation will not delay, and I will grant salvation in Zion, and my glory for Israel. Now, first in the first part of that, he's referring to a man of God's purpose that he's going to call, and that's a reference back to some of the other places where it talks about King Cyrus, how he is going to restore the remnant, or be involved in restoring the remnant back to Jerusalem and restoring the kingdom. And then at the end of that little section that I just read, he talks about, he calls them stubborn-minded and that they are very far from righteousness. But he also says, I'm bringing my righteousness, it's not far off, and my salvation will not delay, and I will grant salvation in Zion and my glory for Israel. Now, I think that's a reference forward to the Messiah, to Jesus coming. That, hey, it's not going to be long before my salvation is going to come. And so in many places, he foretells the coming of the Messiah. And if you were to go on and read into chapter 48, I read this whole, like I said, I don't like to skip chapters, and so I try to kind of read over those ones that they are, skipping, just to see. But if you get over to 48, in particular, one thing that I thought was interesting, in 48 verse 4, he calls them obstinate, and it says, your neck is an iron sinew, and your forehead bronze. That's a picture, isn't it, of being stiff-necked and hard-headed. And that, I think that's what they were saying. Your head, is as hard as bronze, and your neck, it's like iron. So basically, you're so stubborn that you're not listening to me when I'm telling you to stop following the idols and other things too, And so anyway, I thought that was kind of an interesting verse. And one other thing that I wanted to kind of add at the end now to conclude this section about God acting. Because God does have that plan from the beginning. He's already planning for the end. And he's got that plan in mind at all times, even though we forget about it and we go about our daily life, and we might not every day at all times be thinking that Jesus could come today. We talk about it sometimes in church, and sometimes you think of it in your devotion time or whatever, but we don't go through our day with that very present, what if it's in the next 5 minutes? We don't have that urgency, but at the same time, God has his plan in place, and he's working it out. And it reminded me so much of something that we have used in missions. I don't know why, but it brought it to my mind, and so I thought, okay, I'm going to stick this on the end because this is just a thing to know. I guess we'll call it that. But there's something called end visioning, and that's what made me think of it. End visioning is when you are trying to make a plan, and we, in our futile efforts, try to make plans for the church or for our Sunday school class or for outreach or whatever we do. End visioning then is almost like tied up with brainstorming, where you're going to say, okay, what is the goal that we're trying to accomplish? And you have to be able to see that goal and know what it is that you're hoping to accomplish before you can make plans to go for that. Isn't that true? So let's say our goal is to see people saved and come to know Jesus. Then we need to then take a step back from that and say, how could they come to know Jesus if they haven't been told? And then let's take a step back from that and say, how could they be told? How could we tell them? And even a step back from that and identify who are the people that we're going to tell. And back further, and this is a way of what we call envisioning. You first you get your goal, and then you begin to break that down. And how could that happen? And that's the way that you get to the point of where you are, and you can begin to go forward to that goal. And it's very important, in long-range planning, but in many ways, in trying to get more members for your Sunday school class, or in trying to encourage others, or whatever the case may be. That's the thought process. But, with God, He already has that end vision and every step along the way. He's got that all figured out already. We just, we don't know it. We don't know what He has planned. But we hope to be a part of it and participate in it, and try to be led by the Lord in what He is asking us to do as a part of that great big picture that He has going on. So, as a personal testimony that I'll give you, and then I'm going to go because I'm making this too long, but a thing happened recently where I had to renew my real estate license. And I thought, should I continue doing this? I mean, there's days, where I get frustrated, or, I feel like, oh, I should have done whatever and I didn't do it, and should I just continue this for another 4 years or what? I'm old, And I got a phone call that night from a lady who said, and it had been like 3 years ago that I sold her house. And she called me up on the phone and she said, I just wanted to call you and tell you how much I appreciate you helping me to buy my house, and how much I love the house that I'm living in, and how I could never have done that without your help. And it really encouraged me for her to do that, because I thought, okay, I'm taking this as an encouragement from God that I do need to keep doing what I'm doing, even though I might not, be making big bucks. But that's not really my goal with doing it. I started out doing it because I felt God was leading me in that direction. And according to that encouragement that I got, I feel like He is still leading me to do that. So let's try to think about the activity of God in the world and how we're fitting into that, and whether we're doing the things that God wants us to do, day by day. Thank you for being with me. I enjoy hearing from you and knowing that you're there. So I look forward to our next time together.